Some stories are better heard with someone else. But you're here alone. Welcome to Don't Listen Alone. This is 100% ad-free, just you and whatever comes next. Drop your location and the time before we begin. Now, listen carefully. Not everything you hear is part of the story. It all started during one of those regular PTA meetings at our elementary school, the kind where parents sit on old plastic chairs in a hot classroom pretending to listen to announcements they don't really care about while secretly comparing report cards and talking about their children's futures. That was where our mothers met, and, for some reason only they understood, decided that it would be a wonderful idea to turn us into best friends. Looking back now, I think it was a pretty bad decision, because at that time Brian already had his own group, the cool kids, the ones everyone wanted to sit with at recess, while I was one of the strange ones on the sidelines, the kid nobody wanted to be seen with unless the teacher forced them to work with me on a project. But parents have their own logic and their own charming way of deciding things for their children without ever asking what we really want, and we, being kids, didn't have much choice. One day, after that PTA meeting, we were formally introduced to each other like some sort of arranged friendship, and from then on, our mothers decided that we would go to school together every morning and walk home together after classes, as if proximity and routine alone could make us best friends. In the beginning, we hardly talked at all. Our walks to school were quiet, filled more with the sounds of passing cars, barking dogs, and our own footsteps than any real conversation. As soon as we stepped inside the school gate, the spell of our forced companionship broke instantly. Once we were within the school grounds, we naturally fell back into our real roles. Brian would drift off toward his crowd, and I would head toward mine. Brian belonged to Class C. He was good at math, art, and sports. Teachers liked him, and other students admired him. He was the kind of kid who got picked first for group activities and games, the kind of student whose name teachers remembered easily, and not because he caused trouble. I, on the other hand, was in Class B. I was good at science, English, and the social sciences. Like most of the students in Class B, I was more on the nerdy side, awkward with other people and always a bit clumsy, dropping books, bumping into chairs, the usual. Still, we comforted ourselves with small jokes about the students in Class A, saying they probably weren't even from Earth, that they were born on Saturn, had alien DNA, and seemed to be naturally good at everything they did. That was how we coped, by laughing at those above us, while quietly trying to survive where we were. There were days, especially Fridays, when our separation during school hours didn't spare us from having to spend more time together. On those Fridays, Brian often had to stay after classes for basketball practice because he was part of the shooting team. Our parents, being strict and very clear with their rules, had told us that we should always go home together and never leave one another behind. So, if Brian had practice, I had to stay and wait for him. I would wander around the school grounds, read something, or just sit in one corner while he stayed on the court, running up and down with his team, laughing with his friends, and taking shots while the coach shouted instructions. Even at that age, I already knew that Brian was embarrassed to be seen with me, especially in front of his friends, and that uncomfortable feeling never really went away. With time, things did improve a little, at least on the surface. We slowly warmed up to each other. We grew more comfortable and started doing some things together outside of the forced walking schedules. Sometimes we went to the library together after school, sitting across from each other as we pretended to study but mostly looked at books that caught our interest. There were days when we ate lunch together in the school cafeteria, sharing a table at the edge of the room where fewer people noticed us. On weekends, we occasionally visited each other's houses. Sometimes I would go over to his place, and we would watch TV or play simple games. Other times, he would come to mine and my mother would insist on feeding us snacks. Once in a while we even went to McDonald's together, saving our small allowances for a burger, fries, and a cold drink. In those moments, I truly believed that we were friends, maybe even best friends. However, inside the school grounds, an invisible line always remained between us. At school, he was always with his type of crowd, the sporty, outgoing, loud group, and I was always with mine, the quieter, less noticeable one. We had some shared time, but the distance between us never completely disappeared. Then came one Christmas in 4th grade, a time that should have been about joy and gifts and celebrations, but became one of my earliest lessons in how cruel children can be. Back then, I believed that Brian was my best friend. In my young mind, walking to school together, staying late on Fridays, talking sometimes after class and visiting each other's houses were enough to prove that we were close. So, a few days before Christmas, I took some of my savings and bought him a small gift. It was nothing expensive or fancy, just a simple present a child could afford. But I wrapped it carefully and, on our way to school, I handed it to him with a mix of excitement and nervousness. I wanted to make him happy, to show him I cared about our friendship. When Brian's friends found out that I had given him a gift, it turned into an ugly scene. They started making fun of me, calling me names and making sissy jokes, turning the whole thing into something shameful instead of kind. They teased him, too, but most of the jokes landed on me. In no time at all I gained a strange sort of notoriety, a ridiculous label that stuck to me like gum under a shoe. It was embarrassing, and it hurt more than I knew how to explain back then. I felt angry, humiliated, and small, but I didn't know what I could do. I didn't have the courage to fight back, and I didn't have the words to defend myself. What hurt even more was Brian's reaction, or rather, his lack of reaction. He didn't join his friends in making fun of me, and for that I was quietly grateful, but he also didn't tell them to stop. He stayed silent, watching from the side as they picked on me. He never stood up for me, never said a word in my defense. A few days before New Year, he returned the gift I had given him. He looked uncomfortable as he handed it back, and said that his mother thought it would be for the best, considering the situation. I took the gift without arguing, but inside I felt something break. It was as if a door that I had opened in my heart was slowly closing again. My parents and brothers knew nothing about the end of this so-called friendship. They didn't know about the teasing, or the returned gift. To them, everything still looked fine from the outside. They asked me several times why Brian did not come over to our house anymore or why I rarely mentioned him. I simply told them that he had other things to do, that he was busy. It was easier than trying to explain something that even I didn't fully understand. The following year, Brian and I drifted even farther apart. We no longer walked to school together. We no longer went home together. Slowly, the routines that had once tied us together disappeared. Our mothers either stopped insisting or quietly accepted that things weren't working out the way they had hoped. For his birthday that year, my mother insisted I go to his house, so I did. When I arrived, his family welcomed me politely, and everything seemed warm and friendly on the surface. But inside, I felt like an outsider, a guest, no longer part of anything. I had brought a birthday gift with me, something my brother had made me buy. Before I left that day, when I was sure no one was watching, I took that gift back home. I simply couldn't bear leaving it there, not when I felt that its meaning had already been damaged by the past. By the time we reached 6th grade, Brian had transferred to a private Catholic school. His parents wanted a better environment for him, and I later heard that they wanted to keep him away from bad influences. He still kept in touch with some of his other friends from our old school, and they saw each other now and then. But between Brian and me, all connection had been cut. We became strangers who lived on the same street, walking past each other's houses but not stopping, no longer sharing even a simple greeting. It was strange how someone who had once been part of your daily life could so quickly become a distant figure. That same year, when I was 12, I had already been branded a sort of petty criminal in some people's eyes, for reasons that were more about gossip and misunderstanding than anything serious. It was also the year I considered asking my father if I could move to Cebu City to continue my high school education there, a decision connected to other experiences I had in a house on Tres Abril, another story entirely. Life moved on. Time pulled me forward. Fast forward to 1997. By then, I had finished high school, survived university, and moved through 2 jobs in private organizations. Both of those first 2 jobs were rewarding in their own ways, and they helped shape me into the person I was becoming. But they were also contract-based, and every time a contract neared its end, I would feel that sickening twist in my stomach, a dread that whispered questions like, "What if they don't renew it? What will you do next? How will you pay your bills?" I grew very tired of that feeling, of always having to worry about the next step. So I decided to make a change. I took a job in a government office, my third job after college. The pay was much lower and promotions came rarely, but the one thing it offered was stability. Job security. A permanent place. At that time, that seemed more valuable than money. During my first week in this new government job, I focused mostly on learning the ropes, trying to understand the processes, the paperwork, the structure of the office, and the personalities of my new coworkers. It was sometime in my second week when I realized that Brian's mother worked in the same agency. I had seen her walking in the hallways a few times, but I didn't recognize her at first. Age and time had changed her face and figure, and it had been more than 15 years since our family had moved away from the old neighborhood. One day, I finally took a closer look, and recognition slowly surfaced. Gathering some courage, I approached her and introduced myself. As soon as I told her who I was, her face lit up. She embraced me warmly, as if I were a long-lost son who had finally come home. Her reaction surprised me. I had expected politeness, maybe mild surprise, but she was genuinely happy to see me. Later, I invited her for coffee at the office canteen, and she happily accepted. Over that cup of coffee, we caught up on each other's lives, filling the gap that the years and distance had created. I learned that she was a widow now, and that she still lived in the same house in our old neighborhood, the same street where Brian and I grew up. Her eldest daughter, the one I used to have a shy crush on when I was a boy, was now married and living in another city with her own family. Her youngest son, whom I call Bobby here, was about to finish college. Her life had changed, but in many ways, it still revolved around the same familiar foundations. Without me even asking, she began to tell me about Brian. She said he had a family of his own now, that he was living with a woman who had given him 2 sons, though they had not yet married officially. She also mentioned, with a hint of disappointment and sadness in her voice, that Brian never finished college because he had fallen in with the wrong crowd. He got into some bad company, and things just didn't turn out the way she had hoped for him. In turn, I told her that I was enrolled in a master's program at the university. I joked, half seriously, that I wanted to be filthy rich by the time I turned 45. At that time, I was in my early 30s. She smiled and laughed at that, clearly proud of what I had managed to achieve so far. She said kind words about my hard work and discipline, and for some reason, her pride touched me deeply. In 2001, I received a new assignment at work. Our office sent me on a tour of duty to the palace, Malakanang, where I was to officially report for the next several years. I stayed there for 7 years in total. Some of the strange ghostly experiences I've written about elsewhere actually happened while I was assigned there, but that is another set of stories. When Brian's mother heard about my assignment to the palace, she reacted as if I had been honored with some great title. In her eyes, this move was a recognition of my skills and talents. She became so proud that she started telling her coworkers that I was her son's best friend and that she considered me like a son of her own. Listening to all this, I felt a small sting of irony. In truth, Brian and I hadn't been best friends in a very long time, and he had never really stood up for me when it counted. Still, I did not have the heart to correct her or embarrass her in front of others. I chose to remain silent about the past and just let her enjoy that version of the story. The week before I officially started my duty at the palace, she gave me a small gift, a coffee mug with a Hallmark message printed on it. She gently advised me to drink chamomile tea instead of coffee sometimes, saying it would be better for my health, especially with the stress of working at such an important place. She told me again how proud she was of what I had done with my life, and how she wished Brian had inherited some of my good sense. Before she went back to her office that day, she told me she had spoken to Brian about me. She said he was happy to hear that I was doing well. She also invited me to have dinner at their house so that Brian and I could meet again, catch up, and perhaps reconnect. I told her I would make time for it. Of course, people say all kinds of things they don't truly mean, especially when they're trying to be polite and avoid awkwardness. Time passed, and I never did go to that dinner. The years flowed by like water. I stayed busy with my work, handled the daily tasks, the late nights, and the ongoing responsibilities. From time to time, Brian's mother would send word to me through a coworker, usually simple messages like, "Brian says hello," or, "We should have that dinner sometime." Most of the time, those messages slipped away from my mind before I could respond properly. I told myself I was too busy, that I would deal with it later. Maybe deep down, I didn't really want to open that old chapter again. Then came 2014. One night, at around 2:15 in the morning, my landline phone rang. These days, hardly anyone uses a landline to call family or friends. Most people rely on their mobile phones and messaging apps. I mostly kept the landline for practical purposes like ordering pizza, calling hotlines, or talking to service providers. So when it rang at that hour, it startled me out of sleep. My coffee-to-blood ratio was at an all-time low, and the insistent ringing pulled me against my will from my warm bed. Half asleep, I dragged myself to the living room, bumping my knee painfully against the side table on the way. I picked up the receiver and, in a very grumpy voice, said, "Hello?" There was a brief pause, then someone on the other end giggled, a strange, light, almost playful giggle, and then hung up. Annoyed, I muttered, "Jerk!" slammed the receiver down, and went back to bed. 3 days later, the phone rang again in the middle of the night, this time at 1:03 in the morning. I woke up, my heart pounding a little from the sudden sound in the quiet house, and again dragged myself out of bed to answer the call. A part of me was worried that it might be a hospital, or the police, because calls at such an hour rarely bring good news. I picked up the receiver and said, "Hello?" There was only silence on the other end. No voice, no breathing, nothing. After a while, the caller hung up again. This time I was more irritated than worried. I unhooked the phone and went back to bed, deciding I had better things to do than entertain silent prank calls in the middle of the night. A week passed without incident, and I eventually hooked the phone back in. Life went on as normal. Then, 2 days later, on a Friday night, the phone rang again. It was 11:23 p.m., a few minutes before midnight, and I was already asleep. Once again, I got out of bed, walked groggily to the living room, and this time stepped on my poor cat, who hissed and ran off in protest. Rubbing my eyes, I picked up the phone and drawled, "Hello?" my voice heavy with exhaustion. "Hi, Clarence," said a voice I did not immediately recognize. "It's me, Brian." For a moment my mind froze. The caller said he was Brian, and the name alone sent a small shock through me. Something about the whole situation felt strange and out of place. The previous silent and giggling calls, the late hour, this sudden appearance of an old name from my past. My brain started sending warning signals, but I was too sleepy and annoyed to fully catch them. "Are you there?" Brian asked when I didn't respond right away. "Yes," I said. "I'm here." I tried to sound normal, but my voice came out flat and tired. "How are you?" he asked, and in my mind I saw him as he had looked when we were children, maybe a little older, grinning from ear to ear, amused by the situation. "Tired and sleepy," I replied, making sure to stress the words. I even yawned loudly into the receiver, adding a bit of extra rudeness without really caring. "Oh," he said, sounding apologetic. "I'm so sorry. I tried to call you twice before, but I hung up at the last moment both times. Sorry about that." So those earlier late-night calls had been him, or so he claimed. "No, it's okay," I said, even though I didn't really mean it. "What's this about? I can call some other time," he offered, his voice carrying a hint of disappointment now. "It's okay," I said again, softer this time. "I'm glad you called. I've been wanting to," he admitted. "It's been a while." "Yes," I agreed. "Since 5th grade." I emphasized the year, as if to remind him just how long it had been. "True," he said. "But that was a long time ago, right?" He sounded as if he wanted to brush away the past with a simple flick of words. That comment stumped me for a moment. Time doesn't always erase what happened. Some things simply sink deeper. What age were we then? He went on, almost giggling. 10, 11 maybe? Most kids are cruel at that age. Yeah, I said slowly. Kids that age don't know any better. Inside, though, I remembered very clearly how much it had hurt. Right, he said, giggling again. Why are you giggling? I asked, suddenly irritated. Because it sounds to me like someone needs to grow up and move on, he said, laughing lightly. For a moment, I wanted to hang up on him right then. He sounded like the same boy who had stayed quiet when his friends made fun of me. The thought crossed my mind that maybe he was calling to ask for a favor, or worse, a job recommendation. I called because I heard you're doing well, he continued, and I wanted to tell an old friend how proud I am of him, of how far he's come in life. I didn't expect you to sound like a fifth grader. That comment stung. What? I said, feeling a mix of anger and embarrassment. Besides, he said, cutting me off gently, I have a bone to pick with you. Oh, do you now? I replied, my tone turning cold. You gave me a birthday present once, he said matter-of-factly. And then, when I wasn't looking, you took it back. I fell silent. I knew exactly what he was talking about, even after all those years. Tisk, tisk, he clicked his tongue. Naughty, naughty, he added, laughing again. I was still struggling to stay fully awake and think clearly, but I knew that memory was real. I just wanted to say hello, he said again after a pause. I didn't know how to respond. So much time had passed. We were practically strangers now, yet here he was, calling me close to midnight, stirring up memories I had carefully pushed aside. I didn't mean to be such an a-hole, he said, and this time, I could hear real sincerity in his voice. Believe me, if we could all go back, I'd do things differently. But we can't. All I can do now is apologize. Okay, I mumbled. It wasn't the most graceful or generous reply, but it was all I could manage in that moment. I could almost hear him smiling on the other end of the line. Does that mean we're friends again? He asked, almost playfully. Okay, I repeated, still half asleep. The entire conversation felt strangely unreal, like a mix between a dream and a memory. In truth, I was still having trouble processing it all. A simple phone call at midnight was not going to erase years of hurt, or the way I had carried that feeling of betrayal with me into my teenage years. To a 12-year-old, betrayal by someone you consider a friend feels like a toothache that won't go away. It keeps you awake at night, ruins your appetite, and just sits there, throbbing and constant. You almost need a small operation to take the pain away, leaving a wound and a scar that lasts long after the ache is gone. You know what? I suddenly said, my patience thinning. I felt so bad after what you and your friends said and did to me that I practically kept to myself all through high school. I was full of hate, and it hurt. It was only when I was in my second year in college that I was finally able to make friends again. I was that hurt. There it was, out in the open at last. The anger, the sadness, the confusing mix of emotions that had settled inside me when I was 12. I didn't bother to hide my annoyance. And honestly, I felt that anyone who calls at nearly midnight has to accept whatever emotional baggage they awaken. He was quiet for a while after my outburst. Then, in a calm voice, he asked, Feeling better? Yeah, I admitted. I do. Strangely enough, saying it out loud did make me feel lighter, as if I had finally let go of something I had been carrying for far too long. Good, he replied, his voice smiling again. So, what now? I asked after a short pause. What do you mean? He sounded genuinely confused. Why did you call me after all this time? I said, unable to hold back the question any longer. Is there some kind of class reunion happening? Did you call to invite me? No, he said, laughing softly. Nothing like that. What's happening is that I'm calling my best friend. Those words had a strange effect on me. On one hand, a part of me wanted to reject them outright. to push them away and remind him that for years we had been nothing to each other. On the other hand, hearing him call me his best friend stirred something in me, a memory of my 12-year-old self who had once believed that very thing and had been so deeply hurt when it seemed untrue. Somehow, those words reached into that broken place and made it feel a little more whole. "Listen," he said gently, cutting through my thoughts. "I know it's late and you have to rest, so good night." "Okay," I said, still unsure, a small part of me wishing the conversation could somehow continue, if only to make more sense of it. But he had already decided to end the call, and after a moment, he hung up. It was a strange call, not very long, 10 minutes at most, but it stayed with me. Despite everything, I was glad it had happened. I went back to bed and, for the first time in a while, slept deeply and peacefully. 2 weeks later, during a quiet moment at work, I finally had the chance to think clearly about Brian's call. I remembered that Mark, a coworker, was the person through whom Brian's mother usually sent messages to me. He also knew the family personally. So I stopped him as he was passing by my cubicle and asked how Brian was doing. I even mentioned casually that Brian had called me recently, late at night, and joked that he owed me a few rounds of beer for waking me up like that. Mark's reaction was immediate. His eyes widened like saucers, and he looked at me as if I had said something terrible. "How can you joke like that?" he asked, his tone sharp and accusing. I was confused. "Did I say something wrong?" I asked. "I told you last year that Brian died of heart failure while he was in the hospital," he snapped. "What's wrong with you?" His words hit me like a cold wave. I had no memory of that conversation. Maybe he did tell me and I had been too distracted at the time to really hear it. Maybe some part of me had refused to process anything related to that old period of my life, burying it under layers of busyness and denial. Later, when he calmed down, he told me the whole story again. Brian had suffered a stroke the previous year and had fallen into a coma. After some time, his heart failed, and he died. Brian was gone. Mark then added that Brian was actually his second-degree cousin, which explained why he had known all the details. I told him about the midnight call, about the voice on the other end of the line that sounded just like Brian, about the apology and the conversation. I told him I was sure it had been real, that I had been awake, that I had gotten out of bed and walked to the living room to answer the phone. Mark just shrugged, repeating that Brian was dead and that this was an undeniable fact. He did not know what to say about the call itself. To this day, I still don't know what really happened. Maybe it was a dream so vivid that it felt real, though I remember the pain in my knee from bumping into the table, the feel of the cold receiver in my hand, the sound of Brian's voice calling me by name. Maybe it was some cruel prank by someone who knew too much, though I cannot imagine who would go that far for a joke. Or maybe it was something else, something that doesn't fit neatly into our normal explanations of the world. Since then, I have kept my landline phone unhooked. I don't even bother turning on the answering machine anymore. I've asked the phone company to cut the landline service completely, and I now rely only on my mobile phone. It feels safer that way, as if I am closing a door that something once used to reach me. I have also asked my nephew and niece, who live with me, to always be home before 10 in the evening. It's a simple rule, but it makes me feel more at ease. I have enough to deal with in life without losing sleep over strange things that may or may not be happening in the quiet hours of the night. It all started when I was in my second year of high school. For as long as I could remember, our house had always felt normal. It wasn't fancy or big, but it was home, and nothing really strange had ever happened there. We never had problems with it, no creepy stories, no unexplained noises, nothing that would make you think twice about turning the lights off at night. The place was simple: concrete walls, a small yard, a few trees at the side, and a faucet outside that we used when the one inside wasn't working. I knew every corner of it, every creak of the floor, every sound the roof made when it rained. It was the kind of place you didn't question. It was just where you lived and where you slept. That was how it was, at least, until my cousin came to live with us. She was one of 16 children. She had 15 siblings, and that alone already says a lot about her life before she arrived. Her family struggled a lot, so my parents decided to adopt her, or at least take her in so she could study and have an easier time. They felt sorry for her, and they also wanted to help her parents, who were doing their best but simply had too many responsibilities. My parents spent a lot of time out of town back then for work, so most of the time it was just us kids at home. I was the oldest, the one who was supposed to be in charge when the adults weren't around. There were 6 of us then, me, my one and only sister, and 4 cousins, including the new one. The house felt full, noisy, and chaotic, but in a good way. We were students busy with school, homework, and the small dramas of teenage life. My cousin, the one my parents had just taken in, was quiet at first. She was polite, helped with chores, and tried not to cause any trouble. She blended into our daily routine easily enough, waking up early, going to school, and following whatever simple rules my parents had left for us. None of us knew at the time that she could see things that the rest of us couldn't. If she did know it herself, she didn't really talk about it. To us, she was just another cousin, another body in the house, another person to share the food and the gossip with. One night, everything changed. It was an ordinary school night. The kind you don't even remember clearly after a week because it feels like all the other nights. We had eaten dinner together, all of us crowded around the small table, talking loudly and laughing over small things that didn't really matter. The sky outside was dark, and the air had that coolness that comes after a long day. The inside faucet wasn't working properly at that time, so we were using the faucet outside to wash the dishes. It wasn't a big deal. We were used to little inconveniences like that. We usually took turns washing the dishes, and that night it was my cousin's turn, the one who had just been introduced into our family. We were all inside the house while she stayed outside to wash the plates. The yard outside was familiar, lit by a single weak bulb and whatever light leaked out from the house through the windows. The faucet was built along the side wall, close enough to the door that you could hear what was happening outside if you listened. I remember that I was inside, probably talking with the others or cleaning up something else, not really paying attention to her. As the oldest, I felt responsible for everyone, but at that moment I wasn't worried. It was just another night, just another chore. Then, suddenly, we heard her scream. It wasn't the kind of scream you give when you see a cockroach or when someone plays a prank on you. It came from deep inside her, sharp and terrified, as if something had startled her in the worst possible way. Before any of us could react, we heard the door slam. She had rushed inside the house so fast that the door banged loudly behind her. Her footsteps pounded against the floor as she ran up the stairs. The sound echoed through the house and made everything feel different, like the air had suddenly become heavier. At first, I wasn't scared. I was more curious than anything else. I thought maybe somebody had played a joke on her, or maybe she just saw something small and panicked. The other kids, though, immediately ran after her upstairs, their voices overlapping with each other, asking what had happened. I followed them, thinking that if this was just some silly game, I might as well join in. I didn't feel any fear yet. To me, it was noise and movement and confusion, but nothing truly threatening. We all ended up in the bedroom upstairs, crowding around the mosquito net, what we called the calambo. Someone had already dropped it down from above the bed, and the others were rushing to get inside it. It was almost instinctive, like we all wanted to hide, even if we didn't fully understand from what. The calambo, which was usually meant to keep out mosquitoes, suddenly became like a flimsy shelter, our little tent of safety. They were all trying to fit under it, anxious and shaking. My cousin, the one who had screamed, looked absolutely terrified. Her face was pale, her eyes wide, and she was breathing fast, like she had just finished running a race. We were all facing the door of the room. Every window in the house was closed, and every door as well, except the door to our room. No electric fans were turned on. The only movement in the room was us and the thin curtain hanging over the open doorway. But that curtain was swaying, gently at first, and then more noticeably, as if someone on the other side was blowing on it or brushing past it. There was no wind strong enough to move it like that, not with everything shut. The air inside the house was still. Yet the curtain moved again and again, lifting up slightly, rising and falling, breathing almost like a living thing. From where I was sitting under the calambo, I couldn't see what was outside the room. The angle and the fabric made it hard to see beyond the doorway. But my cousin could. Her eyes were locked on the space just beyond that waving curtain. Every time it lifted, she seemed to see something that the rest of us couldn't. She would let out small screams, sometimes full ones, each time the curtain rose. Her fear was so intense that it started to infect the rest of us. My sister, who was younger than me, began to cry and call for help. The other cousins added their voices to hers, shouting and sobbing, all of us calling out as loudly as we could in the hope that someone outside would hear us. It felt like we were there for a long time, huddled under the calambo, watching the curtain move and listening to my cousin scream. My heart, which had started out curious and steady, was now beating faster and faster. Even if I couldn't see what she saw, I could feel the terror in the room. It was in the air, in the shaking of the bed, in the way everyone clung to each other. I tried to be brave, because I was supposed to be the oldest, the one in charge, but even I couldn't deny that something was wrong. Curtains do not move like that for no reason. People do not scream like that over nothing. Then, through all the noise and fear, we heard a sound that did not come from us. There was a knock at the front door downstairs. It was loud enough that even through our shouting we could hear it. We stopped screaming just long enough to listen. Another knock came, firm and urgent. Someone outside had heard us. We scrambled to get out from under the calambo and rushed downstairs. Fear was still clinging to us, but so was hope. We wanted to get away from the room, from the moving curtain, from whatever was outside the door that only my cousin could see. When we opened the front door, our neighbor was standing there. They were relatives of ours, people we knew and trusted. Their faces were worried as they looked at us. They told us that they had heard us screaming and wanted to make sure we were all right. We must have looked shaken, with tear-streaked faces and trembling hands. They asked what had happened, but none of us could really explain it properly in that moment. We just knew that we did not feel safe in the house anymore. Seeing how scared we were, they offered to let us sleep at their place for the night. It was like someone had thrown us a lifeline. Of course, we had every reason to say yes. Staying in our house suddenly felt like a bad idea. We gathered a few things quickly and followed them back to their house. It was close by, familiar enough that we had been there many times before, but that night it felt like a refuge, a safe harbor. They gave us one of their rooms to sleep in, and my aunt stayed with us so that we would not be alone. We all lay down on the bed, squeezed together in the limited space. I ended up next to the cousin who had started it all with her scream outside. The lights were turned off, leaving only a faint glow from the street or some stray light filtering through the window. The room was quiet, except for our breathing and the occasional rustling of blankets. It was hard to say whether everyone was really asleep or just pretending. For me, sleep did not come easily. I closed my eyes, but my mind kept replaying the scene, the scream, the slammed door, the running upstairs, the moving curtain, and my cousin's terrified face as she watched something none of us could see. My body was tired, but my nerves were restless. I could feel my cousin's presence beside me, tense and uneasy. After a while, when things had become a little calmer, and the room was mostly silent, my cousin started making a strange sound. It wasn't loud, but it was enough to catch my attention. It sounded like a small, irritated noise, like someone who was uncomfortable and didn't know how to express it. She kept shifting around, moving her head and shoulders as if something was bothering her. I watched her out of the corner of my eye, feeling a slow sense of unease creep back into me. Then she turned and looked directly at me. Her eyes were serious and annoyed, but there was fear behind them. In a low voice, she told me to stop touching her ears. Her tone suggested irritation, like she was scolding me for some silly prank during a time when no one was really in the mood to play. I stared at her in confusion. I had not touched her ears. I had been lying there beside her, trying to calm down, my hands firmly to myself. There was no reason for her to accuse me of something like that. "Why would I touch your ears?" I whispered back, my voice as steady as I could manage. "It wasn't me." She looked at me for a moment longer, her eyes searching my face, and then turned away. The air felt thick with something unspoken. We did not sleep at all that night. Maybe some of the others drifted in and out of light sleep, but as for me and that cousin, we stayed alert and tense, listening for any small sound, feeling every slight movement. It was a long, exhausting night that seemed to stretch on and on. The next morning, when the sun was up and the world looked normal again, I finally had the chance to ask her what exactly had happened. Daylight has a way of making things feel less scary, and I wanted answers. I needed to understand what had made her so afraid, what she had seen that the rest of us hadn't. So when we were alone, or at least not surrounded by too many people, I turned to her and asked her, calmly and seriously, what she had seen outside our house. She took a deep breath and began to tell me. She said that while she had been washing the plates at the outdoor faucet, she suddenly had the feeling that someone was staring at her. It was not just a simple feeling of being watched, like when you sense someone looking your way from across the room. It was stronger than that. It felt like invisible eyes were fixed on her, following every move she made, standing just a little too close for comfort. At first, she tried to ignore it. She thought maybe it was just her imagination, or maybe one of us had gone outside and was planning to joke around with her. So she kept her focus on the plates and continued washing. Then she felt something cold on the back of her neck, like a breath or a touch of air that did not come from the night wind. It was a cold that did not feel natural. It brushed against her skin in a way that made her shiver. She realized that whatever was watching her was now closer, close enough to touch her. That was when she started to hurry. She rushed to finish washing the plates, her hands moving quickly, her heart pounding faster with each passing second. As she was working, one of the spoons slipped from her hand and fell to the ground. It didn't simply drop, though. She said it was as if it had been thrown out of her grip. It landed at a bit of a distance, not where it should have fallen if she had just accidentally let it go. Confused but needing to clean up, she bent down to pick it up. That was when it happened. As she reached for the spoon, a hand grabbed her. She described that hand as feeling real and solid. It closed around her in a way that left no doubt in her mind that it was not just air or a trick of her imagination. It was strong, and the touch was enough to make her panic completely. She didn't wait to see what or who it belonged to. She screamed, dropped everything, and ran back to the house as fast as she could, slamming the door behind her and rushing upstairs to us. That explained the scream and the frantic running, but I still wanted to know about the curtain, about why she kept screaming while we were in the room. She told me that after she ran upstairs and we all went into the room under the Colombo, she knew the thing, whatever it was that had grabbed her, had followed her. She said that even though the door to the house was supposed to be closed, she felt its presence outside the room, just past the doorway where the curtain hung. She could see, from her angle, how the curtain was being lifted and blown as if something unseen was moving close to it, brushing against it or trying to get in. There was still no wind in the house, and no one else was outside the room. She kept screaming because she knew someone, or something, was just outside, trying to get closer, and she was the only one who could sense it clearly. She told me that our house had been blessed before, prayed over and visited by a priest. Maybe that was why, she said, the thing could not enter the room completely, or come inside the house the way it wanted to. Maybe there was something keeping it at the edge, holding it back. That made a strange kind of sense to me. It fit with the way the curtain moved but nothing crossed the doorway. The idea that the house itself, or at least the blessing over it, had stopped something from coming in was both comforting and unsettling at the same time. Then she told me the creepiest part, the one that made my skin crawl more than anything else. She went back to what had happened in our neighbor's house that night, when we were all lying in bed together. Remember the moment she told me to stop touching her ears? She said that by the time she said those words to me, she already knew that it wasn't me touching her. She knew it wasn't any of us. She said that when she turned her head slightly and opened her eyes, she saw a child standing beside her. The child was just there, standing next to her on the side of the bed, staring down at her. She said the child's eyes were fixed on her, watching her in a way that made her feel exposed and uneasy. It wasn't a friendly stare. It wasn't neutral. It felt heavy, insistent, like the child wanted something from her. She told me that she could see such things, that this wasn't the first time she had encountered something like that. Growing up, she had already seen things other people couldn't, even during the daytime. Shadows, figures, faces, presences that didn't belong to the living world. The child by the bed was one of them. She told me that she called out to me and accused me of touching her ears, not because she really believed it was me, but because she wanted the thing to stop bothering her, and also wanted a way to let me know that something was wrong. She hoped that by speaking, by complaining, she could make it go away, or at least break the moment. According to her, once she voiced her complaint, the child disappeared. 1 second it was there, standing beside her, and the next second it was gone, as if it had never existed. But she remembered it clearly. She even told me she recognized that child. She said it was the same child from her school, the one that had been disturbing her even during the day, appearing near her, watching her, following her around like a shadow. To us, that child was unseen. To her, it was always there. After she told me all of this, I didn't know what to say for a while. Part of me wanted to find some normal explanation. Maybe she was just scared and imagining things. Maybe her mind was playing tricks on her because of everything that had happened. But another part of me, the part that had heard her scream, that had seen her face in the bedroom, that had watched the curtain move for no reason, knew that something had happened that night that could not be easily explained. Our house had never felt haunted to me before, but that night left a mark. It wasn't just about the dishes or the curtain or the knocking. It was about the idea that there are things around us that some people can see and others cannot, things that can follow you from one place to another, even from school to home, even from one house to another. After that night, I looked at my cousin differently. Not in a bad way, but with a new kind of respect and concern. She wasn't just the cousin with 15 siblings who had come to live with us. She was someone who had to deal with things that the rest of us didn't even know were there. And as for the house, it never felt quite the same again. Even if the blessing had kept something out, I now knew that the line between safe and not safe was thinner than I had ever imagined. This happened in Davos City, where I grew up, in the same small gated house that holds most of my childhood memories, both the ordinary and the strange ones. I was around 15 years old at the time, old enough to be left alone in the house after school, but still young enough to be attached to the routines of my family, and the sense of safety that came from having them all come home at the end of each day. Our house was not big or fancy. It was simple and practical, built more for function than style. We had a small gate at the front that opened into a short space that passed for a front yard, with some concrete, a bit of soil, and a few plants my mother tried her best to keep alive. The house itself had no garage at all, just 2 back doors and a narrow path that led to the kitchen outside. Inside, the living room was modest, with a bamboo chair that we used as a kind of main seat, and a television placed in front of it. That bamboo chair had seen so many of my afternoons and evenings that sometimes I think it knew more about my growing up than anyone else. My parents were both teachers, working at schools that weren't very close to the house, so their commute took some time. Because of this, they usually came home around 7 or sometimes 8 in the evening, depending on how many papers they had to check or how long their meetings lasted. My older sister, who was already a college student then, had her own schedule. She often had late classes or group projects, so she also usually came home around the same time as my parents, or even later if she had to stay at school or somewhere else to finish her work. It became a normal pattern that on most weekdays, I would be the first one to arrive home. I would let myself in, drop my bag somewhere near the bamboo chair, and fall into it, feeling the mix of relief and laziness that came after a full day at school. On that particular day, nothing felt unusual at first. The sun was still out but already on its way down, and the house had that quiet emptiness that I had grown used to. I slipped off my shoes, relaxed in the bamboo chair, and turned on the television to keep myself company. The shows did not matter much. Sometimes it was a local drama, sometimes cartoons, sometimes news that I barely paid attention to. What mattered more was the background noise, the flickering light, and the familiar sense of routine. While I sat there, our dog was lying near the back door by the dining area. She liked that spot a lot, because from there she could wait for my mom, dad, and sister to come in. The back door near the dining area was connected to the outside kitchen, where we kept our shoe rack and other things. My family had a habit. When they came home, they would first pass through the gate, then walk along the side path toward the kitchen. They would unlock the kitchen door, take off their shoes in that area, arrange them where we kept all the footwear, and only then come inside the house through the dining area. Our dog knew this routine very well. She loved my dad the most, so she often waited by that back door, ears alert, nose twitching, always ready to greet him. On that day, she was sleeping at first, her body curled up near the door, breathing softly, completely relaxed as if she had no worries in the world. I remember feeling a bit lazy. I didn't feel like doing homework yet or going into my room. I just wanted to rest in the bamboo chair for a while and watch whatever was on TV. Time passed in that slow way it does when you are waiting for the rest of the family to come home. The house was quiet except for the sound of the television and the occasional movement of our dog when she shifted her position on the floor. The air felt still, either too hot nor too cold, and I was content just sitting there. Then I heard it, the familiar creaking sound of our gate opening. The metal hinges had always been noisy, and every time someone opened or closed the gate, it made this long, high-pitched creak. There was no mistaking it. As soon as I heard that sound, I instinctively knew that someone from the family had arrived. Since it was early evening, my first thought was that it must be my dad. This thought did not come out of nowhere. It was followed almost immediately by another sound, one that I was very used to hearing whenever my father walked, the distinct noise his crutch made. My father used a crutch to walk, and every step he took made a soft but clear creak, like a small wooden or metal sound that tapped in rhythm with his movement. The combination of the gate creaking and the crutch's sound formed a pattern that I recognized instantly. It was as familiar to me as the sound of his voice. At that moment, I was absolutely sure that my dad had arrived. Our dog confirmed it in her own way. The moment the gate creaked and the crutch sound reached us, she woke up and started reacting immediately. She stood up, her tail wagging so fast it was almost a blur. She made these excited whining sounds that she only used when she knew someone she loved was close. Her whole body seemed to vibrate with happiness, and she moved closer to the door, pawing at it, and scratching lightly as if asking me to hurry up and let her out so she could run to him. My father was her favorite person, and she always greeted him with such joy that sometimes it looked like she might explode from excitement. I, on the other hand, stayed in the bamboo chair. I remember feeling lazy and thinking that since he was going to come inside anyway, there was no urgent need for me to get up and rush to the door. Instead, I decided to wait and see him when he came into the house like he always did. I watched the TV, but my attention was divided now. I kept listening to the sounds from outside. Our dog's paws scratched the door more insistently, and she whined again, eager to be let out, but I still did not move. I just assumed everything was normal. I could hear the faint, steady rhythm of what I believed were my father's steps moving from the gate to the area near the kitchen. The path was short and simple, and I could map it out in my mind without having to see it. The sequence of events replayed in my head like a routine. The gate opens, Dad walks along the path, reaches the kitchen door, and then starts unlocking it. I listened closely, and sure enough, after the sound of the steps, I heard the noise of the kitchen door being opened. Our kitchen door was secured with a long chain, the kind that had to be wound around multiple times, and then unwound again when someone wanted to enter. It was not a quiet lock. You could not open it without making some noise. To unlock the door, someone had to drag the chain and unwind it several times, and the metal links would scrape and clink loudly against each other, and the surface they were wrapped around. As I listened from the living room, I heard exactly that, the loud scraping sound of the chain being unwound and dragged loose, like someone was taking their time removing it, just as my father always did when he came home. Our dog's excitement increased. She scratched at the back door more energetically now and wagged her tail even harder, her body leaning forward as if she might burst through the wood any second. Her ears were perked, and she made those happy noises dogs make when they know their favorite person is only moments away from stepping inside. Everything about that moment was so ordinary, so familiar, that there was no reason for me to think that anything was wrong. Once the chain noise stopped, there was silence. I figured that my father had finished unlocking the kitchen door and had already gone inside. Perhaps he had paused for a moment to put down his things, like the bag he usually carried, or maybe some food he had brought home. Maybe he was straightening his shoes, or briefly resting, or checking something in the kitchen before coming into the house. It wasn't unusual for him to take a little time before stepping into the dining area. In my mind, it was such a normal scene that I just went back to focusing on the television, expecting to see him appear at the back door at any moment. Our dog seemed to calm down a little. After her extreme excitement, she finally gave up scratching the door for the moment, and lay down again, though not as deeply asleep as before. She stayed close to the door, in a waiting position, her head lifted slightly as if still listening. The house went quiet again except for the TV. A few minutes passed. I did not check the time exactly, but it felt like around 5 minutes or so. I started to wonder why he hadn't come in yet, but I didn't feel worried, just slightly curious. It was one of those small questions you push aside when you are tired, and I still didn't bother to get up and look. Then, all of a sudden, I heard our gate creak again. The exact same familiar, drawn-out sound of metal hinges moving, the sound that announced someone was either entering or leaving. At the same time, I heard that distinct sound of my father's crutch again, the careful, rhythmic pattern of his steps as he walked from the gate toward the side of the house where the kitchen was. This time, my reaction was different. A part of my mind woke up fully and started trying to make sense of what I was hearing. I had not heard the gate open again after that first time. There had been no sound of it closing and opening between the two moments. If my father had arrived earlier, unlocked the kitchen, and then left again through the gate, I would have heard both his crutch and the gate as he went back out. But I had heard none of that. The first time, I heard the gate open, his crutch sound, and the chain being unwound. Then silence. Now, once more, I was hearing the gate and his walk from the gate to the kitchen, and then again the sound of the chain being dragged loose and the door being unlocked as if someone was doing it all over again from the beginning. It felt like I was listening to the same moment on repeat. A kind of déjà vu washed over me. My dog reacted again the same way she had the first time. She whined, jumped up, and rushed to the back door, tail wagging like crazy. Her reaction matched exactly what she did when my dad genuinely arrived home. She wasn't confused. She was happy. That confusion now moved into me instead. It was as if there had been two arrivals, but no departure in between. The second time I heard the gate and the chain, something inside me told me I needed to move. This time, I decided not to just sit and wait. I stood up from the bamboo chair and walked toward the back of the house. The path from the living room to the dining area and then toward the kitchen was short, and I had walked it so many times that my feet knew it by heart. My dog's excitement seemed almost to guide me, her attention fixed on the back area. As I reached the entrance to the kitchen area, I saw my father there. He looked exactly like he always did when he had just arrived home, tired but present, carrying his bag and the plastic bags with our dinner inside. His clothes were slightly dusty from his commute, his hair a bit messy, his expression ordinary, like nothing strange had happened at all. To him, it was just another evening. I looked at him and felt a strange chill inside me, not because he looked different, but because everything around this moment suddenly felt wrong in a way I could not explain. The question formed in my mind almost immediately. I asked him, straight away, if he had come in earlier and gone out again. I tried to keep my voice calm, but I know there was confusion in it. I told him that I had heard the gate open earlier, heard the familiar sound of his crutch, and heard the chain being unwound on the kitchen door. I told him that our dog had gotten excited and that from where I was in the living room, I had been certain he had arrived. He looked at me, surprised. He shook his head and said no, he hadn't been there earlier. He had just arrived now, at that very moment. He had not gone into the kitchen before that. He hadn't opened the gate earlier and then gone out again. He had come home only once, and that was the time I had just witnessed. There had been no earlier arrival. Hearing him say that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I believed him. There was no reason for him to lie about something so simple. My father was a straightforward man. If he had gone out again for some reason, he would have told me. Besides, there was nothing in his demeanor that suggested he was hiding anything. The way he moved, the way he was just then unlocking the kitchen door and adjusting his bag, all of it matched the idea that this was his first and only arrival that evening. And yet I knew what I had heard the first time. I remembered the exact sequence of sounds: the creaking of the gate, the sound of the crutch, the chain being unwound, the dog's excited reaction. It had all felt so real. It had not seemed like my imagination. Even our dog had responded as if her favorite person was just outside. Dogs do not usually react that strongly to nothing. The silence after that first sequence of noises now felt ominous in my memory, like something had been left unfinished. Back then, I had filled that silence with normal thoughts. Maybe Dad was reading something. Maybe he was resting in the kitchen before coming in. But now, realizing that my father had, according to his own experience, arrived only once, that earlier series of sounds took on a different meaning. After we moved inside the house, and we began to settle into our usual night routine, the thought kept returning to me like a stubborn echo. If my father did not come into the kitchen and unlock the chain earlier, then who had? If he said he had not opened the gate, then who had passed through it, making that familiar creaking sound? Who or what had walked along the path, step by step, with something that sounded exactly like my father's crutch? Who or what had made our dog react with such joy and excitement, the way she always did when my dad came home? And most disturbing of all, what or who would I have seen if I had gotten up from the bamboo chair the first time and gone to the kitchen to greet whoever I thought was my dad? That question settled deep into my mind and refused to leave. Sometimes I think about the thin, invisible line between the moment I chose to stay seated and the possibility of a very different experience. If I had not been so lazy, if I had opened the back door that first time, maybe I would have come face to face with something that only sounded like my father but was not him. Maybe I would have seen no one at all, just an unlocked kitchen door with the chain hanging loose, and an empty space where someone should have been. Or maybe I would have seen a shape, a shadow, a presence that wore the sound of my father's walk like a mask. I will never know for sure, and in some ways, I am grateful for that. But the memory still lingers, and even now, when I remember that evening in Davos City, the small gated house, the bamboo chair, the creaking gate, the sound of the crutch, and our dog's excited tail, I cannot help but feel a shiver run through me, as I quietly wonder what really came home ahead of my father that day. This happened about 11 years ago, when I was only 12 years old and still very much a child who believed that the scariest things in life were horror movies and ghost stories told by older people trying to frighten the younger ones for fun. I live in Nueva Ecija, and back then our neighborhood was much quieter and darker than it is now. The streets were not well lit, and at night everything seemed to fade into shadows. It was the night of October 31st, Halloween, around 8:30 in the evening. The air was a little cooler than usual, and there was that strange, expectant feeling that always seems to come whenever people are talking about spirits and the dead, even if you are not sure whether you really believe in them or not. That night my cousin Jen, which is not her real name, was visiting our house. Her home was only one street away from ours, so it was common for her to drop by. We would hang out, talk, laugh, and act like the kids we were. That evening, I felt especially happy to have her around because Halloween always made me feel a little uneasy, like the world was thinner and anything could happen, and having someone with me made the night feel safer. There were only 2 street lights in our area, one near the corner and another somewhere farther along the road, and between them there were long stretches of darkness that made the whole place look like something from a horror story. The weak yellow glow of those lights did not really scare the dark away. It just created small islands of visibility surrounded by long, uncertain shadows. At some point during that visit, I asked my cousin if she could sleep over at our house. The idea of staying up with her, maybe telling stories, eating snacks, and trying to forget that it was Halloween sounded fun to me. But she immediately told me she could not, because she did not have permission from her parents. She was not the type to disobey them and just stay without telling anyone, so that seemed like the end of the idea. I did not want to give up so easily though, so I suggested that we go to her house together and ask her parents properly. I thought that maybe if I was there, and they saw that we were responsible enough to ask, they would say yes. It was still early by our standards, just 8:30 p.m., and in my young mind it did not seem like a big deal to walk one street and back. Our neighborhood was familiar. We knew the roads, the houses, the people. Still, it was Halloween, the streets were dim, and in the provinces you often hear people say that this is the time of year when spirits wander more freely. Even if you do not completely believe it, those words linger in your mind and make every shadow seem deeper. At that time, the suitor of my sister's Yaya, whom we called Kuya Leo, was at our house. He was older than us and a familiar face, someone we trusted enough to joke around with. When he heard that my cousin and I were planning to go to her house and ask permission from her parents, he immediately offered to accompany us. He said it was too dangerous for just the two of us to walk in the dark, especially with only 2 streetlights in the area and plenty of dark corners. We agreed right away, not only because it made sense but also because it felt good to have an adult with us. As a 12-year-old, having an older person around always made me feel like nothing could really go wrong. He even had a friend or two with him, so we had a sort of small group heading out into the night, which made the whole thing feel less scary and almost kind of fun. So we left our house and walked toward my cousin's place. The streets were quiet except for the distant sounds of dogs barking somewhere, a radio playing from a house we passed by, and the soft, gravelly sound of our own footsteps on the road. The air smelled faintly of dust, plants, and the kind of coolness that comes at the end of the day. The shadows of trees and fences stretched across the ground, shifting slightly whenever a breeze passed by. We reached my cousin's house without any trouble. It was a small, modest house like many others in our area, with a simple yard and a door that we had walked through many times. We went inside, and my cousin asked her parents for permission to sleep over at our place. They were cautious but not overly strict, and after a short conversation they finally agreed. I felt a wave of relief and happiness rush through me. The plan had worked. She could sleep at our house and we could enjoy the rest of the night together. We did not stay long. As soon as she had their permission, we thanked her parents and headed back. The same small group made its way out of the house and onto the dark street again, me, my cousin, and Kuya Leo, along with his friends. We started walking home, and at first everything felt the same as before. We talked a little, laughed a bit, and I tried to ignore the fact that the night seemed a bit darker now that we were on our way back. When we were about halfway to our house, something in the atmosphere changed. I suddenly felt chills running down my back, the kind that make you want to pull your shoulders in and wrap your arms around yourself even if you are not cold. It was as if the air had dropped a degree and something heavy was watching us from somewhere just beyond the circle of weak light cast by the street lamps. I felt scared, even though I was not walking alone. My cousin was beside me or a few steps ahead, and Kuya Leo and his friends were close by, joking and chatting. In theory, I should have felt very safe. But the fear did not care about logic. It was there, crawling over my skin, making my heart beat a little faster. It was then that I noticed where we were. We were in front of the old house people in our area always talked about, the one that was known for unexplained things happening at night. I had heard stories about that place from neighbors and older people. Some said they saw lights in the windows when no one was living there. Others said they heard strange noises or saw shadows moving where there should have been none. The front yard of that house was full of tall trees that grew close together, their branches and leaves overlapping and casting tangled shadows over the ground. Even in the daytime, it looked a bit eerie, like the kind of place where secrets might hide. At night, it was far worse. The trees became dark silhouettes, and the spaces between them looked like open mouths swallowing the light. On the other side of the road, opposite that old house and its forest-like front yard, there was a small house sitting alone in the middle of a field. It looked a bit isolated, with open space around it, and at night it seemed like it was floating in the darkness. The field was mostly empty, just grass and soil stretching out in all directions, making the small house look even more lonely. I was just about to walk past, trying very hard not to stare too long at the old house or at the field, when something caught my eyes and made me stop. From the direction of the old house, I saw movement, and then I saw it clearly. There, emerging from the shadows of the yard, was a huge white dog. It was not the size of a normal dog. It was enormous, easily around 6 feet tall when standing on all fours by my estimate. Though I was 12 and only knew that it was far bigger than any dog I had ever seen in real life. Its fur was white, but not the fluffy, friendly kind of white you see on some pet dogs. It looked rough and thick, and the whole body of the animal was strong and solid. Its ears were long and pointed, covered in hair, standing upright in a way that made it look alert and unnatural. Its muzzle was long, like that of a large hound or a wolf, and when it turned its head slightly, I could see sharp fangs glinting, clearly visible even in the dim light. The way it moved was calm, almost casual, as if it was just taking a quiet walk and had every right to be there. The huge white dog came from the area of the old house and walked across toward the small house in the field. Its movements were smooth, not aggressive, but there was something deeply wrong about it. I think part of the horror came from its size and the fact that it appeared so silently. No barking, no growling, just this massive pale shape crossing the darkness as if it had stepped out of a story. I froze where I stood, my heart pounding. My mind struggled to decide whether I was really seeing what I thought I was seeing or if my imagination was playing tricks on me because of all the ghost stories I had heard about the area and because it was Halloween. But the dog looked real. It had weight, presence, and it cast a shadow. I could not convince myself that it was only in my head. Panic and confusion rose in me. I could not just keep it to myself, so I called out to my cousin, who was walking in front of me. I said her name and told her that there was a dog. I pointed toward the small house in the field, trying to show her where the creature was walking. But when I pointed, the dog was gone. In the space of a few heartbeats, it had disappeared completely. There was no large white dog, no movement, no trace left behind. The field was empty. The small house stood there alone in the darkness, just as it had before. The night air was still. It was as if nothing had ever crossed it. My cousin turned to where I was pointing and saw nothing. That made the fear inside me twist into something more complicated. I had seen something clearly, but now it was gone and I was the only one who had noticed it. My cousin looked at me with a puzzled expression, but we did not stop walking. The others were still chatting, and they had not seen anything unusual. We continued forward, my mind now filled with images of that unnatural white dog and questions about what it was and where it had gone. We had not gone much farther when something else happened, something even closer and more personal. We were about 200 meters away from my house, close enough that I could almost imagine seeing our gate if the street lights had been brighter. We were walking along the road, and I was trying to calm myself down, telling myself that maybe my eyes had played tricks on me when I saw the dog. Then, all at once, a little boy appeared right in front of me. He was just there, standing in the middle of the path, blocking my way. I did not see him approach from any direction. One moment the space in front of me was empty, and the next moment, he was standing there. The boy looked like he had been soaked in water for a long time. His clothes clung to his body as if they were wet, and his skin had that pale, wrinkled look that you see when you stay too long in a pool or bath. His hair was flat and limp, as if it had been pressed down by water and had not dried properly. He did not look like an ordinary child out playing at night. He looked like someone who had come out of a river or a well and had been standing in water for hours. I was so shocked that I stopped immediately and just stared at him. He was looking in my direction, but I could not tell if he saw me or if he was looking past me. Everything in me went cold. It was as if time had slowed down, and my body was frozen in place along with it. My cousin noticed that I had stopped walking and that something in my face had changed. She and Kuya Leo both turned to me and asked what was wrong. Their voices sounded normal, concerned but not frightened, which contrasted sharply with the terror that I felt. I pointed ahead and told them that there was a little boy standing right in front of me. I tried to describe what he looked like. But when they looked, they saw nothing. The road ahead of us was empty, just a stretch of concrete leading toward our house, lit faintly by the distant street light. There was no boy. No one was there except the people in our group. They started laughing, assuming that I was trying to scare them because it was Halloween. They teased me lightly, saying that I was making up stories or trying to play a prank. They told me that there was no little boy and that if I wanted to frighten them, I would have to try harder. But I knew what I had seen. The boy was as real to me in that moment as the dog had been. My heart was still beating fast, and my palms were sweaty. I could not shake off the image of his soaked body and lifeless appearance. My cousin, noticing that I was genuinely shaken, held my hand and gently pulled me forward, telling me to walk and not to think about it too much. I let her lead me, grateful for the contact, even though my mind was still racing. I did not know what to believe anymore. It felt like the night had shifted into something different, something where the line between the living and the dead was much thinner than I had ever imagined. When we finally reached our house and were safely inside, the bright familiarity of our home made me feel a little better, but the memories of what I had seen would not go away. I went to my grandmother and told her everything. I told her about the huge white dog that had come from the old house and walked toward the small house in the field. I described its size, its white fur, its sharp fangs, and how it had vanished when I called my cousin's attention to it. Then I told her about the little boy who appeared in front of me, looking like he had been soaked in water, and how no one else had been able to see him. My grandmother listened quietly, not laughing, not interrupting, just taking in all the details. When I finished, she said that there really was a boy who appeared in that area, and that other people had seen him too. She did not know his whole story, but she had heard that a boy had once died nearby and that he sometimes showed himself to certain people at certain times. Her words gave me chills, but they also made me feel less crazy, because it meant that what I saw might not have been just my imagination. Someone else had seen something similar before. However, when it came to the big white dog, my grandmother said she had no idea about that. She had heard stories about the boy, but not about any huge dog roaming near the old house and the field. It was my sister's Yaya who offered an explanation. When she heard my story about the dog, she told me that it might not have been an ordinary dog at all. She said that it was actually an aswang, a kind of creature from our folklore that can change form and is often associated with evil or dangerous intentions. She said that sometimes these creatures appear as large animals, like dogs, and that they may look like they are far away when in truth they are much closer than you think. The idea that the creature I saw might have been an aswang made my skin crawl. I thought about its size, its strange calmness, its sudden disappearance, and the way it had seemed to watch everything silently as it crossed from the old house toward the small house in the field. The more I remembered, the more her explanation seemed to fit, even if it terrified me. After that night, things were not the same for me. It was as if something inside me had been opened. I started experiencing more paranormal things, small and big, and I became more sensitive to the presence of things I could not fully explain. Sometimes I would feel someone watching me when no one was around. Other times I would see shapes or figures out of the corner of my eye that vanished when I turned to look at them directly. I would hear sounds at night that did not belong to any person or animal I knew. The world felt more crowded, not just with living people, but with others who were not supposed to be there. It began to feel like I was walking through two layers of reality at once, the normal one everyone could see, and another one beneath it, full of things that did not always stay hidden. It started to drive me a little crazy, because I could not always tell when something was truly there or when my fear was magnifying everything. That one Halloween night in Nueva Ecija, with the half-lit streets, the old house, the tall trees, the field, the huge white dog, and the soaked little boy, marked the beginning of that sensitivity. Ever since then, I have not been able to look at dark streets and quiet houses the same way again. In January 2012, I took a 1-month vacation and flew back to the Philippines. I was excited to see my family and to be home again after such a long time, but at the same time I was very hesitant and afraid to stay in our old house. That house had been closed for almost 9 years. Nobody really lived there anymore. Someone from the family would come once a week to clean it, sweep the floors, dust the furniture, and open the windows for a little while so the air could circulate, but the rest of the time it stayed locked up and empty. Just knowing that it had been quiet and dark for so long made me feel uneasy, as if the walls had been patiently collecting silence, memories, and maybe other things I didn't want to think about. Still, it was our house, and part of me felt I had to face it. When I arrived, we opened the gates and the front door, and that old familiar smell hit me, the smell of a place that has been closed too long. It was a mix of dust, old wood, and something else I couldn't name. The windows were still the same, the furniture was still in its place, but everything felt heavy and slightly off, as if the house had been sleeping and wasn't ready to wake up yet. I told myself I was just being dramatic. I was tired from the trip, and my imagination was doing the rest. My aunt and her 3 children were with me. We had arranged that they would stay there too so I would not be alone. That made me feel much better. The thought of staying in that big, quiet house by myself was too much. With them there, it felt less like a haunted place and more like a home again. Because the lights in some of the bedrooms were broken, and we didn't have the courage to stay in those rooms anyway, we decided to sleep in the living room. It was big and open, and we could all spread out on the floor with mattresses and blankets. Somehow, lying there together where everything was visible felt safer than going into one of the dark bedrooms at the back of the house. We turned on the lights in the living room and kept them on. We told ourselves it was just for convenience, but we all knew we did not want to sleep in the dark. My first night there was surprisingly okay. I was nervous at first, listening to every little sound the house made. The creak of the wood, the light movement of the curtains when the wind blew, the small noises from outside. But nothing strange really happened. My aunt lay near her 3 kids, and I felt comforted hearing their breathing and the soft movements they made while sleeping. I told myself that maybe my fear was unnecessary, and if we could get through the first night, then maybe the rest of the month would pass peacefully. For about a week, things stayed that way. I settled into a routine. During the day we would go out, visit relatives, run errands, and come back to the house in the afternoon or evening. At night we would cook, eat together, talk, and then settle down to sleep in the living room. But as the days passed, I slowly began to feel that something was off. It was not one big event at first, more like a collection of small feelings. An odd chill in the air even when the weather was warm, a sense that someone was watching from the darker corners of the house, the feeling of being stared at when I walked past certain doors. I tried to shake it off, telling myself that I was just thinking too much because I already knew the house had been empty for years. Still, the uneasiness grew, especially at night when everything was quiet and our breathing was the loudest sound in the room. One night, about a week into our stay, something happened that I will never forget. I woke up at around 3 in the morning. I didn't know why at first, but then I heard my baby cousin crying. She was only 1 year old at that time. Her crying was not just a little whimper, it was a full, distressed cry, the kind that tells you something is really bothering a child. The light in the living room was still on because we never turned it off. The brightness should have been comforting, but somehow it made the shadows in the corners look even darker, like they were hiding behind the brightness. I blinked a few times to adjust my eyes. At first everything was a bit blurry from sleep, but after a few moments my vision cleared, and I turned my head toward where my cousin was. What I saw made my heart stop. Standing in front of my baby cousin, who was lying there crying, was a black shadow-like figure. It wasn't a shadow that you see on the wall that clearly belongs to someone or something. It was more solid than that, but still almost completely dark. It didn't have clear features like a face or clothes, but the shape was roughly human, tall and still. It was just there, standing over her, staring at her as she cried. The air around us suddenly felt colder, and a chill crawled up my spine. I could not hear it moving. It didn't make any sound at all. It was just silently watching my cousin, and my cousin was crying as if she could feel what I was seeing, as if she knew something was there that should not be there. Fear rose inside me quickly, but I knew I could not just lie there and do nothing. My aunt was sleeping beside me, and her 2 other children were nearby. I immediately reached out and shook her shoulder, my voice almost trembling as I whispered urgently, "Hey Joy, guysing!" She opened her eyes, still half asleep, and asked what was wrong. As soon as she looked up, the shadow disappeared. It was as if it had never been there. 1 second I could see it clearly, and the next second there was just empty space. My baby cousin was still crying. The 2 other kids were still sleeping soundly, unaware of what had just happened. I told my aunt what I had seen, how there had been a black shadow figure standing in front of the baby, staring at her while she cried. My aunt's expression changed. She became worried and tense. She looked around the living room, but of course there was nothing there now. Still, the way my cousin cried made it hard to ignore. My aunt tried to comfort the baby, but somehow the crying still felt connected to what I had seen. I decided to do what I could with what I had. I took my rosary and placed it beside my baby cousin, near her head. I silently said a prayer in my heart, asking for protection. Then I went to get some salt, because I had heard that salt can scare away certain spirits or entities. I also took a large knife, not because I thought I could fight a spirit with it, but because people say knives can also help drive away unseen things when placed nearby. I placed the salt and the knife near us as well. After that, my cousin slowly calmed down. Her crying stopped, and she eventually fell back to sleep. The rest of the night passed quietly, but I did not sleep as deeply after that. I kept waking up to check on her, looking at the space where the shadow had stood, half expecting it to appear again. The next morning, things took another strange turn. My aunt's second son, who had been sleeping well the night before, suddenly began to act strange. He became very quiet and looked weak, and soon he was burning with a high fever. It came on quickly, like a switch had been flipped. One moment he was fine, and the next his body was hot and shaking. My aunt became more worried. We tried to bring his fever down with medicine and cool cloths, but still, the timing of it all made me think back to that black shadow and the babies crying. I couldn't help but wonder if there was a connection, if something had been moving around us in the house that we could not see most of the time, but that sometimes showed itself or affected us in other ways. That night, I was extra grateful when my cousin Dale and my uncle came to visit us. My uncle was around the same age as me, and having them there made me feel less alone. I thought that with more people in the house, whatever was there might be less bold. We sat together, talking and drinking a little, trying to relax. The mood was lighter with them around. My cousin Dale didn't believe in ghosts. He said he believed in demons, but not in random ghosts wandering around. For him, if something existed, it had a clear purpose, something darker, something more serious. His disbelief in ordinary ghosts made him joke about our fears, and for a while that helped me feel less afraid. At some point in the evening, while we were still talking in the living room, I took my phone out and decided to snap a picture of my cousin Dale. It was just for fun, a simple photo to remember the night, nothing planned or posed. He smiled or made some natural expression, and I clicked the picture without thinking too much about it. After that, as the night grew later and we grew more tired, we decided it was time to sleep. We settled down again in the living room because we still did not dare to sleep in the other rooms. The memories of the black shadow near my baby cousin were still fresh in my mind. During the night, my uncle told me that he heard heavy footsteps in the hallway. The hallway in our house leads from the living room to the other parts of the house, including the bedrooms and the kitchen. It is narrow, and at night it looks long and dark, especially when the lights in that part of the house are off. My uncle said the footsteps sounded as if someone was walking slowly but firmly. like a person with heavy shoes. The sound wasn't coming from outside. It was inside the house. Usually, in the Philippines, nights can be warm or even hot, especially in January. But that night, the air inside the house was so cold that it felt unnatural. I could feel the cold on my skin, and it sank into my bones, different from the normal coolness of a night breeze. It felt thick, like the coldness of a place that has been closed and filled with something unseen. My uncle whispered that the place was really cold, his voice low so the children wouldn't wake up. I told him to try to sleep, because I was scared too, and if we started talking too much about what we were hearing and feeling, I knew I might not sleep at all. Morning came, and we were all still alive and in one piece. Nothing very obvious had happened while it was still dark, and daylight always makes things feel more manageable. The fever of my aunt's son was still there but a little lower with medicine. The house looked almost normal again with the sun coming in through the windows and the noise from outside drifting in, neighbors talking, motorcycles passing, children playing at a distance. I tried to shake off the tension from the night. We went through our day, cooking, cleaning a bit, resting. By around 4 in the afternoon, I was sitting outside on the katra, a bamboo bed we kept outside to relax on. That katra had always been a comfortable place to sit or lie down in the late afternoon, watching the sky change colors or just feeling the air on my face. It was something normal and simple, something that felt safe. As I sat there, I saw something pass in front of me. It was quick, just a movement at first, like a white shadow crossing my field of vision. It was not solid enough for me to clearly see details, and it moved so quickly that my brain barely had time to register what it was. I told myself it was just my imagination, or maybe a trick of the light. The house nearby, the sun, and the shadows can sometimes play with your eyes, especially when you are already on edge. So I tried to ignore it. I stayed on the katra, sitting quietly, telling myself not to be foolish. About 5 minutes later, however, the same white shadow passed in front of me again. This time it was more visible, more defined than before. It was not like a human figure, yet not completely formless either. It was a pale, floating shape, like a small cloud of light, but with the suggestion of some kind of body inside it. It moved silently through the air, at about the height of a person, but it did not touch the ground. It simply glided across my view, as if it were crossing a space it had crossed many times. I watched it with wide eyes, my heart starting to beat faster. This was not imagination. It moved too calmly, too purposefully. It was definitely floating in thin air. There were no cars passing, no curtains blowing, no people walking by. It was just me and that white shadow in that small space outside. Fear took over. I couldn't convince myself it was nothing anymore. I jumped off the katra and ran toward the gate. I pushed it open and ran down the street to the nearest store, where my aunt was at that time. I did not even look back, afraid that if I turned around I might see the white shadow following me. My cousin Dale and my uncle were not around at that moment because they were playing basketball somewhere nearby. I wanted them there. I wanted as many people as possible around me because something was not right with that house or with the space around it. The same kind of strange things kept happening. There was one time we tried to sleep in the master's bedroom, thinking that maybe, with more people and with our cousins there, it would be okay. I went in with Dale and my cousin Jen. We brought our things and tried to act normal, talking and laughing a little. But as we settled down and it grew quieter, I felt something that made me change my mind very quickly. While lying there, I suddenly felt a cold hand touch my leg. It wasn't a draft of air or a random brush of a blanket. It was the distinct feeling of fingers in a palm, cold and unmistakable, resting or pressing lightly against my leg. There was no one there near that part of my body. Dale and Jen were not touching me, and there was nothing else that could explain that sensation. Panic rose in my chest like a wave. I did not stop to think or analyze it. I got up and ran out of the room, my heart pounding, and I did not look back until I was out in the hallway. After that, I had no desire to sleep in the master's bedroom again. The living room, with all its lights, felt safer. Before going back to Italy, I decided to skim through the photos I had taken during my stay. I scrolled through them one by one, looking at the familiar faces and places, the house, my relatives, small moments we had tried to capture. Then I reached the picture of my cousin Dale, the one I had taken when he and my uncle first visited us during that week of strange events. Something about that photo caught my attention immediately. I zoomed in, and there, on his shoulder, I could see something that did not belong. It looked like a face, faint but definitely there, leaning over or resting on his shoulder. The expression was unclear, but the shape of the eyes, nose, and mouth were visible enough for my brain to recognize it as a face. It was not a reflection from a window or a trick of light that I could easily explain. It seemed too specific for that. I showed the photo to others, and they all said the same thing. There was something on his shoulder, and it looked like a face. When I showed it to Dale, he became scared. He didn't joke about demons then. He told me to delete the photo because he didn't want to think about what it might mean. I hesitated, but seeing how frightened he was, I eventually agreed. Before I deleted it, though, the image of that strange face stayed in my mind, adding to the feeling that there had been more with us in that house than just our family. I also tried taking photos of different parts of the house. I wanted to see if anything strange would show up in the pictures, some sign that what I was feeling and seeing wasn't just in my head. When I looked at those photos, I noticed that many of them were full of orbs, little round spots of light floating in the air in the pictures. Some people say orbs are just dust reflecting light, but there were so many of them, and they seemed to appear especially in areas where I had felt something or seen something out of the ordinary. It added another layer to my uneasiness. The black shadow figure that I had seen standing in front of my baby cousin did not stay in that house. I began to feel that it had followed me. After I left the Philippines and went back to Italy, I thought maybe the strange experiences would stop, that whatever was attached to that house would stay there. But I kept sensing that something unseen was with me. I would feel that same heavy presence near me, especially at night. Sometimes, when I was alone, I would get the strong feeling that someone was standing just behind me or watching me from the corner of the room. It was not always visible, but the feeling was familiar, the same cold, observing sensation I had felt when I saw that shadow looking at my cousin. I even sought help, wanting to know what to do. Some people I talked to said that the black shadow had become attached to me, that it liked me because of my personality. They said I was bubbly and talkative, and that certain spirits or entities are drawn to that kind of energy, like curious people are drawn to bright lights. Hearing that did not exactly comfort me. It made me feel as if I was walking around with an unwanted follower I could not see, one that could not easily be removed. Even now, I often feel that the black shadow figure is still following me, staying just out of sight but always nearby. Because of all this, I am often scared to sleep at night with the lights off. Every time I turn off the lights and the room becomes dark, the chilled sensation returns, and I feel as if something is staring at me from the shadows. It is not the harmless feeling of simply being alone in a dark room. It is a heavy, pointed kind of attention, like eyes fixed on me from the places I cannot see. Sometimes I end up turning the lights back on and sleeping that way, just for the sake of feeling a little less vulnerable. Some people who hear my stories or see how affected I am by these experiences tell me that I need mental assistance, that maybe it is all in my head, and that I am imagining things because I am too sensitive or too emotional. Maybe they are trying to help, or maybe they simply don't believe in the unseen. I understand why they say that, because if you have never felt a cold hand on your leg, or seen a white shadow float past you, or watched a black figure stare at a crying child, it is easy to think all of this is just fear and imagination. But for me, these experiences are real. They have stayed with me for years, shaping the way I see the world and the way I feel whenever the lights go out and the house grows quiet. It happened a long time ago, back in 1998, when I was only 11 years old and the world still felt simple and big at the same time, the kind of time in your life when you think the scariest thing you will ever face is a strict teacher, a lost exam paper, or a ghost story told by older cousins just to make you jump, but then something happens that you never forget for the rest of your life. It was March 1998, Summer vacation, that part of the year when school is finally over and every kid in the neighborhood feels like they have been released from prison, free to run in the streets, stay awake late, and spend their days and nights playing outside without worrying about homework or waking up early. During those summer nights, the streets in our place would come alive in a special way. The adults would sit outside on plastic chairs or wooden stools, talking about grown-up things like work, money, politics, or gossip about people we did not really know, while we kids turned the street into our playground. We played all kinds of games, but one of our favorites was hide and seek. Almost every night, as soon as dinner was done and the sky turned dark with just a bit of blue left, we would gather outside, calling each other's names one by one, until our small group of regular playmates was complete. There were 7 of us in that group, all around the same age, plus minus a year or two. We knew every corner of our street, every house wall, every pile of wood or junk that we could use as hiding places. When we played hide and seek, we would run around shouting and laughing, our slippers slapping on the ground, our voices echoing in the quiet night. We didn't care about the time because it was vacation, and our parents were used to our late-night games, as long as we stayed near home where they could still see us if they stepped out of the gate. We would hide behind parked tricycles, squeeze ourselves into narrow spaces between houses, crouch under tables set outside, or climb onto low roofs if we were feeling brave enough. The air would be hot and sticky, but the evening breeze, even if it was just a little, helped cool us down as we ran around, our shirts soaked in sweat but our faces smiling. When we got tired, which usually happened later at night, we had this habit of just sitting down together at the side of the street, near a small sorry store that was already closed or almost closing, and talk about random things. We would sit in a circle or in a line, our legs stretched out or crossed, sometimes still catching our breath from all the running. The street by that time would be quieter, with only a few people still out, maybe someone buying a last-minute item at the store, or a neighbor going home late. The streetlights above us would be dim and yellow, casting soft shadows on the ground and giving everything a slightly orange glow. It was during those times of resting and talking that we felt closest to each other, like we were a small secret club. We would talk about video games we wished we could play in the arcade or on game consoles that only a few of us could afford, about toys we saw in commercials, about anime series that we were all addicted to and tried never to miss on TV, and about all the silly things that seemed so important to us back then. We would imitate the special moves of our favorite characters, argue about who was stronger between one hero and another, and even talk about wrestling, WWF or WWE, which were really popular during the 90s. We would try to copy the entrance moves of the wrestlers, brag about which one we liked best, and talk like we knew everything about how real the fights were, even though deep inside we probably knew they were just part of a show. Those were simple nights, with simple worries, and sometimes I wish things had stayed that way. But there was one night during that summer that none of us will ever forget, no matter how many years pass. It started like any other night. We gathered together as usual, played hide and seek until we were all sweating, dusty, and laughing so hard our stomachs hurt. The sound of our laughter mixed with the distant noise of a radio from someone's house, the occasional bark of a dog, and the faint hum of motorcycles passing on the main road. After we finally got tired of running, the 7 of us sat down at our usual spot along the street, right under one of the streetlights, talking animatedly about wrestling. We were in the middle of a heated but fun conversation about our favorite wrestlers from WWF/WWE, talking about moves like the Stone Cold Stunner and the Rock Bottom, arguing over who was cooler, who was stronger, and who would beat whom if they were in the ring together. Some of us pretended to be commentators, describing imaginary matches, while others acted out fake punches and holds just for fun, pulling each other's shirts and laughing. The night felt normal, like all the other nights before it. The sky above us was mostly clear, with a few thin clouds, and the stars were visible despite the dim light of the street lamps. The air was warm but not too hot, and there was only a light breeze, nothing strong. The houses around us were quiet, their windows mostly dark except for a few where people were still awake. There were also some bystanders a little distance away from us, near a sorry store. The store's metal cover was down halfway, and a faint light from inside showed the outlines of the people standing near it. There was a middle-aged man and two teenage boys, probably around 16 or 17, just chatting to pass the time. They were laughing and talking in low voices, glancing at us from time to time with mild amusement, as if remembering their own younger days when they used to play the way we did. Everything seemed calm and ordinary. Then, without any warning at all, something changed. A strong gust of wind suddenly hit us. It wasn't like the usual breeze that comes from one side or from along the road. This wind felt different. It came from above, rushing down in a way that made us all feel it on our faces and on the tops of our heads. It was strong enough to make us blink, to push back our hair, and to make the small bits of dust and leaves on the ground around us move. It felt almost like someone had dropped a giant invisible hand from the sky, stirring the air directly over us. At the same moment the wind hit, we heard a sound that I still remember clearly, even though so many years have passed. It was a terrifying sound, like nothing we had ever heard before. If I had to describe it, I would say it sounded like a mix between a growling man and the harsh, cawing cry of a crow, but deeper and more powerful. It was not like any animal noise we were familiar with. It wasn't a dog, a cat, a chicken, or even a pig. It wasn't just the loud call of a crow, or a simple shout from a person. It was a strange combination that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. The sound seemed to vibrate in the air, like it was all around us, coming from above, sharp and deep at the same time, as if something was warning us or announcing itself in a way that we could not ignore. Our first reaction was the most natural one possible. We all looked up. Even before we fully understood what the sound was, our eyes just went automatically toward the sky, searching for the source. And there, directly above us, only about 30 feet high, we saw it. A huge black bird was flying overhead. When I say huge, I don't mean just a little bit bigger than a normal bird or even a large crow. I mean so big that when we looked at its wingspan, we could tell it was about as long as two cars parked bumper to bumper. Its wings were wide and dark, cutting through the air in slow, powerful movements. The body of the bird was solid and black, darker than the night sky, making it stand out clearly against the stars. It didn't shimmer or shine. It was like a moving piece of shadow, but thick and heavy. The feathers looked rough and massive, and its head was pointed forward, focused on wherever it was going. For a long, breathless moment, none of us could move. We were frozen in fear, our eyes locked upward, our mouths open but no sound coming out. The entire world seemed to shrink at that moment to just us and that creature above. All the noise from earlier disappeared from our minds. We didn't hear our own breathing, we didn't hear the sounds from nearby houses, we didn't hear anything else but that strange, horrible sound and the beating of our own hearts. Even the air felt different, heavier and colder, as if the presence of that thing had pushed down on everything. None of us thought about running at first because we were too shocked. Our bodies just refused to move. All we could do was stare. The huge black bird did not swoop down at us, did not try to attack or grab anyone. It just flew past, gliding over us like some dark ruler passing over its land, then moving away into the distance. But even though it didn't harm us, its presence alone was enough to shake us to the core. No one spoke. As it moved away, the terrifying sound faded with it, leaving behind an eerie silence. For about a full minute after it passed, nobody spoke, nobody laughed, nobody even moved much. It was like the night was holding its breath right along with us. We were not the only ones who saw it. We later found out that many strange things are easier to forget when you are alone, because you can convince yourself that maybe you imagined them. But that night, there were witnesses aside from us. The middle-aged man and the two teenage boys who had been chatting near the Sari store had also fallen silent when the wind hit us and the strange sound echoed. When we finally managed to turn our heads and look around, we saw them standing very still, their eyes also fixed on the sky where the bird had been. The look on their faces told us everything. They were stunned, just like we were. They were older than us, and seeing adults and teenagers just as frozen and pale as we were made the whole thing feel even more real and more frightening. If it had been just us kids, maybe someone could have said we were exaggerating, or that our imaginations were too wild. But these older guys had seen it too. After that long moment of silence, someone finally found the courage to speak. I don't remember which one of us talked first, or whether it was one of my friends or one of the older boys by the store. But the first sound that broke that silence was small, weak, almost like it did not want to disturb whatever remained of that strange moment. Then everyone started talking at once, asking, "Did you see that?" Or, "What was that?" The middle-aged man, who had been standing there near the store, suddenly took charge. He looked at all of us, me, my 6 friends, and the 2 teenage boys, and told us to go home right away. His voice was firm and serious, leaving no room for questions or jokes. "Omiwi na keo," he said, or something to that effect, and we could hear the concern in his tone. It was not just a suggestion. It was an order from someone who felt responsible for the kids in the neighborhood, and who knew that whatever we had just seen was not normal and not something to be taken lightly. We did not argue. We did not make any excuses the way we normally did when adults told us to go home early. Nobody asked for 5 more minutes, or said, "Last game na lang." We just stood up and went our separate ways toward our houses without hesitation, each of us walking faster than usual, some almost breaking into a run once we were a little farther apart. The fun of the night was gone. The mood was broken. All that we had been talking about earlier felt unimportant compared to what we had just witnessed. I remember feeling like the shadows around us were watching, like the night itself had become too big and dangerous. In my mind, the image of that huge black bird kept replaying over and over. The next morning, the neighborhood was buzzing with chatter, but not the usual kind about small things. A piece of news spread quickly throughout our village, passing from house to house, from gate to gate, until almost everyone seemed to know about it by noon. We heard that a pregnant woman had been found dead in a vacant lot near our village. People said her body had been discovered early in the morning by someone passing by. The moment I heard the news, my stomach dropped. I felt a strange heavy feeling, like something had clicked into place in a way I did not want to understand. According to the older folks in our area, the woman's body was in a strange condition. From what they said, there were no large wounds, no signs of a violent struggle like you might expect if she had been attacked by a person with a weapon. Instead, they said there was only a small hole on her abdominal area. It was such a specific detail that it spread quickly from one mouth to another. People repeated it like it was a line in a story, each time making it sound more and more mysterious and frightening. The idea that a pregnant woman could be found dead with only a small hole on her abdomen made everyone uneasy. It did not sound like a normal crime, not like the kind you hear about on the news involving robberies or fights. It sounded like something else, something darker and harder to explain. My friends and I were scared, but at the same time we were very curious. We wanted to know if it was really true, if the details we were hearing were real or just exaggerated. We talked among ourselves about the news, asking each other what we had heard and from whom, trying to piece together what might have actually happened. Eventually, our curiosity, mixed with the fear that had not left us since the night before, led us to do something we would not normally do. We decided to go to the woman's funeral. In our culture and in our neighborhood, it was not so strange for even kids to visit wakes and funerals, especially if they were nearby or if the whole community seemed involved. It was something people did out of respect, but in our case, I have to admit that curiosity played a big part too. We wanted to see with our own eyes if the stories about the woman were true. When we got to the funeral, the atmosphere was heavy. There were family members crying, people whispering in corners, and neighbors who were quietly discussing what had happened. The air around the wake was thick with sadness and something else, something like fear. Death is always heavy, but this one felt different because of how strange and sudden it was. We approached the coffin carefully, not wanting to seem disrespectful. We glanced at the woman lying there, her face peaceful in the way bodies often look at wakes, and we could not help but think about the fact that she had been pregnant. We did not see her abdomen, of course, because it was covered, but knowing what people had said made it hard to look at her without imagining that small, mysterious hole. While we were there, we noticed that the 2 teenage boys we had seen the other night, the ones who had been standing near the sari store, were also at the funeral. The middle-aged man who had told us to go home that night also came and paid his respects. When I saw them, I had a strange feeling that they were there for the same reason we were, not just out of respect, but also because they were curious and unsettled by the connection between what we had all seen and heard that night and what had happened to the woman. We glanced at each other, and although we did not talk much about it openly at the wake itself, there was a shared understanding in our eyes. In our hearts, I think we were all thinking the same thing, even if we could not prove it and even if we were too scared to say it out loud right away. In a place like ours, where stories about strange creatures and dark things still live in people's minds, it was hard not to connect the dots. The night before, we had seen a huge black bird flying low over our street, its wingspan as wide as 2 cars, its voice a terrifying mix of a growling man and a crow, passing above us like it owned the sky. The next morning, a pregnant woman was found dead in a nearby vacant lot, with only a small hole in her abdomen. We knew the folk stories that our elders told us, the ones about creatures that roam at night, that can fly, that prey on pregnant women and unborn children, creatures that are either fully human nor fully animal. We had heard those tales many times as children, usually told to scare us into coming home early or to make us behave. But now those stories did not feel like simple bedtime tales anymore. They felt uncomfortably close to what we had just experienced. Nobody said the word out loud at first, but it was there in our minds. When we looked at each other, when we remembered the sound from that night and the size of that shadow in the sky, when we listened to the whispers of the adults at the funeral, we all felt it. We all had the same thought, the same guess, the same fear about who, or what, the murderer might have been. And although time has passed and I have grown older, that night in 1998, the huge black bird in the sky, the wind from above, the terrifying sound, and the news of the pregnant woman found dead with only a small hole in her abdomen still remain in my memory as clearly as if they happened just yesterday. And I still cannot shake the feeling that we all witnessed something that was not meant to be seen by human eyes. It happened when I was in college. Or at least I am very sure it was during that time in my life because I already remember worrying about exams, projects, deadlines, and all the usual things that come with being a college student. I cannot remember the exact date and day because back then all the days kind of blended together. I only know it was a very late and very quiet night, the kind of night when the world feels half asleep and half empty. I think the time was around 2 or 3 in the morning. It was that deep part of the night when most people are already in their deepest sleep, when the streets outside are almost completely silent, and when any sudden sound can easily make your heart jump. I was in my room, in my own bed, and by all normal standards it should have been a peaceful and ordinary night. I had gone to bed like usual, tired from a long day, not expecting anything strange to happen. I remember lying down, closing my eyes, and slowly drifting off into that soft, heavy sleep where your body relaxes and your thoughts begin to blur and disappear. Some time after that, I woke up, not because of a sound or movement, but because of a feeling. It is hard to fully explain that feeling to someone who has never gone through something like it. It was not a simple discomfort like being too hot or too cold. It was not the normal feeling of waking up because you need to drink water or go to the bathroom. It was a tremendous, overwhelming sensation that seemed to press down on me from all sides. My eyes were still closed at first, and my mind was in that halfway place between sleep and waking, where you know you are conscious but your body feels like it has been left behind somewhere else. I tried to move, just a little, maybe to roll over or lift a hand to rub my face, but I quickly realized that I could not move at all. My whole body felt trapped, as if invisible hands were pinning me down to the bed, or like I had been wrapped in something heavy and tight that kept me from even twitching. In that moment, I understood that I was stuck in something like sleep paralysis, though at the time I did not put that word to it right away. All I knew was that I was awake enough to think, to feel, to panic, but not awake enough to control my own body. I wanted to shout for help. In my mind I could hear myself calling out, trying to say someone's name, any name, even just a loud meaningless shout. But when I tried to open my mouth it felt as if my lips were glued shut and my throat was locked. No sound came out. I felt my chest rising and falling with my breath, but the breath itself felt shallow and tight, as if something was pushing down on me. I wanted to raise my arm, to push myself up, or even just to move my fingers, but nothing responded. It was like my brain was sending signals and my body refused to obey. The only parts of me that I could move were my eyes. They were the only things that still felt like they belonged to me, the only parts that seemed free from whatever force was holding me down. The fear that rushed through me at that point is hard to describe. It was not like being startled by a sudden noise or frightened by a scary movie. It was deeper and more intense, the kind of fear that crawls under your skin and sits in your chest like a stone. I could feel sweat forming on my forehead and running down the sides of my face, even though the room itself did not feel hot. My heart was beating fast, and I remember thinking, very clearly, that I might be dying. That sounds dramatic now, but in that moment, when you cannot move, cannot speak, cannot even cry out, and you do not understand why your body is betraying you, the thought of dying does not feel like an exaggeration. It feels like a real possibility. My mind began to race. I tried to calm myself and tell myself that it would pass, that I would wake up fully if I just waited, but the feeling did not fade. It stayed heavy and solid, pressing on me and keeping me in place. My bed was in the corner of my room. If you walked into the room, you would see that one side of the bed was pushed up against the right wall, and the head of the bed was close to another wall. This meant that my right side, as I lay there on my back or slightly turned, was very close to the wall. I knew that even without opening my eyes, because it was familiar to me. I had slept in that position many times before. On that night, as I lay there trapped in that frozen state, I decided that if I could not move my arms or talk, maybe I could at least see what was going on. Maybe if I saw something in the room that could explain it, or even if I saw nothing at all, it would somehow comfort me. So I forced my eyes open. It took effort, more effort than it should, as if even my eyelids were too heavy. The room was dim. I did not have a bright light on. There was only the faint glow from outside, maybe from a street light finding its way through the curtains, or from the small amount of light seeping in under the door. The darkness was not complete, but it was enough that the corners of the room looked unclear and shadowy. Because my bed was in the corner, and the wall was on my right side, I first only saw the blank, still surface of that wall when my eyes opened. It did not help or change anything. I still could not move, and my body still felt locked. So I began to move my eyes from side to side, slowly at first, then a little faster, trying to scan the room for anything unusual. My eyeballs were the only part of me that I could control, so I used them as much as I could. I rolled them to the left, then to the right, then back again, as if by doing this enough times I might somehow break free. At first I did not see anything but the usual shapes of furniture, the vague outline of my door, and the darker places where the light did not reach. But then, as I turned my eyes to the left side of my bed, I saw something that made my blood run cold. At the left side of my bed, in the space between the bed and the rest of the room, I caught sight of a dark shape. It was not like the simple shadow cast by a chair or a pile of clothes. It was a black figure that had depth and form, something that looked like it was actually there, taking up space. My heart, already beating fast, seemed to trip over itself. For a moment I thought maybe it was just my imagination, maybe my eyes were playing tricks on me because I was half asleep and terrified. I closed my eyes for a second and then opened them again, forcing my eyeballs to turn back to the left side and focus more clearly. I wanted to confirm what I had just seen. Deep inside I was hoping that when I looked again there would be nothing there, that it was just a trick of my mind. But when I turned my eyes to the left again and focused, my hope was crushed. The shape was still there, and now, as my eyes adjusted more to the darkness, I could see it more clearly. It was not just a random dark shape. It was a figure, and I realized with growing horror that it was a long-haired woman in a black dress. She was not standing tall. It looked like she was kneeling beside my bed. Her body leaned forward slightly as if she was very close to me, close enough that if I could move, I might reach out and touch her. Her long hair hung down, framing her face, and even though the room was dim I could see the outline of her hair clearly against the shadows. The black dress she was wearing blended in with the darkness of the room, but its shape was still visible, like a pool of night gathered around her. The most unforgettable and terrifying part of her, however, was her eyes. She was looking directly at me. There was no doubt about it. Even though I was lying there motionless, even though I had not moved anything but my eyes, she seemed to know that I had seen her, that I was aware of her presence. Her eyes were red and bloodshot, not just slightly red from lack of sleep or irritation, but deeply, unnaturally red, like they had been filled with blood. They were wide open and fixed on my face, and the intensity of that gaze made my whole body feel even colder. It felt like her eyes were not just looking at me, but into me, searching somewhere deep inside. The expression on her face was not gentle or kind. It was heavy, dark, and cold, as if she carried a lot of anger or pain, or both. For a moment I tried to convince myself that this was just a dream. I told myself over and over in my head that I was still asleep, that I had to be asleep, and that this was nothing more than a nightmare. I wanted it to be a nightmare so badly, because if it was a dream, then all I had to do was wake up and she would be gone. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that this did not feel like any dream I had ever had. In most dreams, no matter how scary, things feel strange and disconnected, and sometimes you only remember them in bits and pieces when you wake up. But here, every detail felt sharp and real. I could feel the sweat on my skin, the weight of my body on the bed, the roughness of the sheet under my fingers even though I could not move them. I could hear the faint sounds from outside, like the distant bark of a dog or the hum of a passing vehicle. I could feel my heartbeat pounding in my chest. All of it was too clear, too real, and at the center of it was this woman with red eyes staring at me. I looked away for a split second, as if maybe by breaking eye contact she would vanish. Then I forced myself to look back, and she was still there, still staring straight at me with those horrible eyes. This continued for what felt like a very long time, though in reality it might have been just over a minute. But when you are in that kind of situation, seconds can stretch and feel like hours. Every moment her gaze stayed locked on me felt like someone was dragging ice down my spine. I could literally feel her presence, not as something light and gentle, but as something heavy and pressing, like an invisible weight sitting on my chest and shoulders. It was as if the entire room was filled with her, as if she had pulled all the warmth and comfort out of the air and replaced it with this chilling, suffocating energy. I knew that ignoring her was not really an option. I could not close my eyes and pretend she was not there, because even when I blinked, I could feel that she was still kneeling beside my bed, still watching me. At the same time, I was stuck and had no control over my body, so I could not get up and run away. I was trapped between fear and helplessness. So I tried something that even now I do not fully understand. I decided that if I could not escape, maybe I could do something else. I tried to stay calm, or at least as calm as a person can be when they are staring into the red eyes of a ghostly woman in the middle of the night. I told myself that I would look at her one more time, very clearly, and maybe try to communicate with her. I do not know where that idea came from. Maybe I thought that if she wanted something, if she had a message or if there was a reason she was there, acknowledging her might help. Or maybe I was just desperate to do anything other than lie there in pure terror. I gathered what little courage I had left, took a slow, shaky breath through my nose, and turned my eyes fully toward her again, this time deliberately, forcing myself to look straight at her face. What I saw next is burned into my memory even more deeply than the first sight of her. She was still looking at me, still with those same bloodshot eyes locked onto mine, but now, instead of just a blank or angry expression, she was smiling. It was not a warm or reassuring smile. It was a scary, chilling smile, the kind that sends a wave of cold through your whole body. Her lips were curved up in a way that felt wrong, as if she was enjoying my fear, as if my helplessness amused her. The smile did not reach her eyes. They remained sharp, intense, and strangely empty, and that combination of dead, red eyes and that twisted smile made her look even more horrifying than before. I did not move. I could not move. But somehow I did not look away. I do not know where the strength came from, but I kept my eyes on her. In my mind, one thought was screaming loud and clear. I wanted to fight back. I did not want to be just a victim lying there, powerless and silent. Some part of me, the stubborn part that does not like to be pushed around, woke up inside my fear. I started to think. If only I could move, I would fight back. If only I could move, I would punch her in the face. It sounds strange to say that now, but in that moment, thinking about fighting back gave me something to hold on to. It made me feel less like prey and more like a person who still had some control, even if it was only in my thoughts. I kept my gaze fixed on her for a few more seconds. It felt like we were locked in some silent, terrible battle, her staring at me with that awful smile and me staring back at her with all the fear, anger, and defiance I could muster. Then, all at once, she began to fade. It did not happen slowly, like a person walking away. It was more like she dissolved. One moment she was there, clear and solid, the next she began to lose her shape, her edges becoming less defined, her body turning blurry like smoke in the air. Her face, her hair, her dress, all of it faded in front of my eyes. In maybe 10 seconds or so, she was completely gone, as if someone had erased her from the room. There was nothing left where she had been, just the empty space beside my bed and the familiar darkness of my room. Almost at the same time that she disappeared, the heavy feeling in my body began to lift. It was like whatever had been holding me down suddenly let go. I felt my muscles responding again, my fingers twitching, my arms and legs regaining their strength. The pressure on my chest eased, and I could breathe more deeply. It felt like coming back into my own body after being pushed out of it. My delayed reaction, the one my mind had been preparing for while I lay there helpless, finally exploded out of me. I raised my arm and punched toward the space where she had been, not once but twice, swinging my fist through the air. But of course, there was nothing there anymore. She was already gone. My punches hit only empty air, and the invisible memory of her presence. I lay there for a while afterward, breathing hard, my heart still pounding, my whole body still covered in sweat. I was wide awake then, fully and completely. Sleep was impossible after what had just happened. I stared at the ceiling, at the walls, at the spot where she had knelt beside my bed, trying to make sense of it. I asked myself over and over if it had been a hallucination or merely the result of sleep paralysis playing tricks on my mind. But no matter how I tried to explain it away, I could not erase the vividness of what I had seen, especially those red, bloodshot eyes and that frightening smile. Even now, when I think back on that night, I can still feel the cold fear and the weight of her gaze, and I can still imagine what it felt like to be trapped, unable to move, staring into the face of something that did not belong to the world of the living.